Over the past couple of weeks, as we've been kind of walking with Nehemiah and his story, we've learned first the importance when you recognize an issue, a crisis, when you're standing in the midst of rubble, the first thing you need to do is just to stop, reflect, and pray. Oftentimes we move too fast and we try to jump into situations too quickly and we miss opportunities. And when you try to run into situations too fast, we allow our own personal pursuits, our own personal pride and self-seeking ways get in the way rather than seeking God and His righteousness and His kingdom. And from there, the important thing is we stop, reflect, and pray is that our mindset is to seek God and to wait on Him. And the more you seek God and wait on Him, He's the one who opens up the opportunities for rebuilding, for those efforts to achieve. And when those opportunities open, it's time to walk forward. It's time to seek rebuilding, seek reconciliation, whatever that is in your life. And here's the thing, as you walk through this, you begin to realize the pain you're in. I think it's hard because one thing we often overlook is that when you're standing in rubble, is the acknowledgement that in the rubble there is pain. And that really affects us. And we want to spend some more time with Nehemiah chapter 2 this week because Nehemiah chapter 2 really lays some really strong groundworks in who Nehemiah was and how he moved forward because he had to recognize the spiritual reality of rebuilding the walls. And when you recognize a spiritual reality and what the goal is, what the objective is, what the win is, then you begin to realize and acknowledge there are some characteristics that I need to have. Because if I do not develop and walk with these characteristics, I will not be successful at rebuilding. What we see throughout scriptures. And that's what Nehemiah showed here. And Nehemiah 2, as you read through that, you begin to realize Nehemiah showcased some strong characteristics that were a necessity in order to accomplish the rebuilding. And when he arrived there, he showed those. And I believe as we walk through today, we begin to see characteristics that we need to develop within ourselves as well. The first characteristic that we see with Nehemiah was this humility to examine the situation. And the key word there is humility, because it's one thing to just walk around and say, okay, I see a problem, that's a problem, that's an issue, we got to deal with that. What happens is when you fail to walk and examine in humility, your own desires and personal interests and everything else get in the way. And it's hard to see the nature of the situation when we don't walk in humility. With Nehemiah, he first prayed. And like I said, the past 2 weeks, and like you'll hear me say throughout this series, Nehemiah was a man of prayer. And if there's one lesson we all can walk away from this series, is we need to be people who pray. We cannot accomplish anything in our lives or in this world if we do not become individuals and a community that makes prayer a priority. Without prayer and seeking God and waiting on God, you will accomplish very little. You will accomplish very little. Nehemiah took time to pray and then to examine the situation. And this is where humility has to come in, because when we lack humility, and humility is kind of putting myself aside and my feelings and everything else aside for the moment to seek what is the situation. Let me really examine the situation. When I fail to do that, all of a sudden I just start running towards solutions. I start running towards let's answer the problems. Let's fix this. Let's come to conclusions and let's figure this out. And when you do that, when you rush to conclusions, when you just rush into solution mode, you bring more destruction. And that's the fear. Because when you sit in rubble, and rubble equals pain and hardships and difficulties, and what then happens is I try to rush to try to figure out the situation and find solutions based upon my desires and my own interests. And before we know it, I'm doing that through my own pain, and I'm creating more destruction, not developing solutions. And that's what we see here with Nehemiah. He was sitting here in the rubble, and he realized, I have to slowly examine. the walls. I mean, it's easy. Come here. The walls are destroyed. We got it. But let me walk through and really identify the whole situation, the whole landscape. You know, we learn about this spiritual journey all throughout the scriptures, and we see it really be highlighted in Hebrews 12. We've talked about this before, and I really think this all kind of comes together. In Hebrews 12, the writer talks about how we need to throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles us. And this is all from a book called Unhindered. And I shared that with you before. And if you read that, awesome. If you haven't read that book, I really encourage you to grab that book, Unhindered, and read it, because wherever you're at in your spiritual journey, it is powerful. Because it unearths some things that maybe you didn't recognize or see in your spiritual walk before. And what happens is, we can recognize our sin, but what often we don't see are the things that hinders our hearts. And what happens with those things that hinder our hearts, what then happens is, out of the things that hinder our hearts, we create what the book calls little t truths. You know, there's what is truth of the situation, or Jesus, or whatever it may be. And then we start to move towards little t truths because of the hurt or the pain or the things that are hindering our heart. And then out of those little t truths, we create these new realities, all based upon these little t truths that have developed in our lives. And then if you're not careful with it, if you don't deal with it, what then happens is your attitudes, your behaviors, how you respond to people and situations, all are reflective of the new reality that you're living in, that you're trying to protect. That's all built out of the little t truth that you've developed because of the things that hinder your heart. That's where humility comes in. Humility walks in this because you have to acknowledge, okay, I have things in my heart that are affecting how I view and interact in this. As I sit in the rubble, as I sit in the pain, I got to work through that. Because what happens is, when we don't do that, when we face this stuff in our lives, when we face rebuilding in our lives, whatever that rebuilding is for you personally, I can almost guarantee you it's going to stir pain. It's going to stir pain. And if we don't recognize that, the pain will clutter our view and destroy our efforts, and probably cause you to go down paths that bring more destruction and pain down the road. And that's why this is so critical. It's identifying those things. Because when we don't, this is where self-pride gets in. And we always view pride, when we read about the Bible, how pride is the root of all evil and sin. You know, the Bible says that. And when we look at that, what the problem is, we always view pride in the limited idea of, well, pride is just walk around thinking you're all that and you're a jerk and, hey, look at me, I'm pretty awesome, you know. But that's just one glimpse of pride. But pride consumes every one of us. Every one of us has a level of pride. And what that level of pride comes in is, maybe it's you don't take the time to say, I have these hindrances in my heart that I need to deal with. I'm not saying that I'm the cause of the pain right now, but if I don't deal with this, then I'm going to make the pain worse. And so I got to deal with it. To rebuild, I got to fix this. And I can't just overlook this. I need to be honest with it. Or pride comes in and says, I don't need anybody's help. I got this. I can do it all by myself. I don't need your help. I can rebuild it myself. I know to hammer walls. And that's what happens is, pride comes in so many different ways, and what happens is we miss the opportunities that God's laying in front of us, or we just add to the rubble. And what we see here with Nehemiah is how important it is to walk in humility as you examine the situation. That you're not seeking your victory, that you're not seeking what you want things to be, but you're seeking Jesus first. This is what Jesus laid out in Matthew 6:33. He said, that our efforts are to be seeking first his kingdom and his righteousness. And then he said, and all these things will be added to you. We experience victory and we experience his grace and his love and his care as we seek his righteousness, his kingdom. Not my kingdom, not my righteousness, not myself, when I seek him. And humility is all developed out of those words from Jesus. I am seeking him, not me. And when we stand in the rubble of our lives, whatever that may be, and pain becomes real, it's so critical. It's critical. Because if we're not walking humility, we miss opportunities. So Nehemiah 2, we begin to see this play out. Verses 12 through 15, Nehemiah said, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone that my God had put me in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. By night, I went through the valley gate toward the jackal well, and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on toward the fountain gate and the king's pool, but there was not enough room for my mount to get through. So I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered the valley gate. You see what Nehemiah there? The first thing he got there after a couple of days, he said, I need to go out, because I think he spent a couple of days just kind of with the people and probably experiencing the hurt and the pain of all the 140 years that poured into this moment. He says, I need to go out. But if you saw what he did, he went out alone. This is crucial. There's a lesson here in this humility of examining the situation. Because what Nehemiah is highlighting here is so often as we walk in humility to try to identify and examine the situation of the rubble I'm standing in, whatever that may be in my life, what happens is then if I'm not careful, all of a sudden I begin to allow all these outside influences into my life that begin to say, here's the problem. Here's what you need to do. This is the issue. It's their problem, whatever it may be. And so before you even can get into the moment of what do we need to do, you've allowed yourself to be so influenced by all the outside influences. And so what Nehemiah did was, listen, I need to walk in humility and I need to examine the situation. And I cannot let all the people who, oh, by the way, have been sitting in the rubble for 140 years, so they weren't really seeing it either. And they may have all their suggestions for the suggestion box. But guess what? I can't allow them to influence me to examine what's the situation. What needs fixed? Where do we need to start? We all know there's a problem, but how do we go after this? What's success? And then from there, he moved on to the second characteristic, and that is honesty. Honesty to admit the problems. Being honest with the situations. And I think where the people struggled. Because what happens is, like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, there's people in two different camps. There's the ones who are sitting there in the rubble and just like, it's just become normal. Let's just go with it. And before you know it, you begin to not become honest with the situation. And then there's those who are like, we need to fix the problem. But to fix the problem, I need to be honest with the situation. What are the real issues? How can we really fix this? How can we really move forward? Because Nehemiah showed something here. Standing in the rubble, I think he was acknowledging as you read through this story is that this is not just an easy, let's go build the walls, right? This was a complex issue. It wasn't like, let's wake up tomorrow and everything's going to be great. Isn't that true in life, friends? It seems like every challenge we face, every time we stand in our own rubble, metaphorically, our heart, our self-desire to try to fight, hey, let's just do this and it can all be done, right? But it seems like every issue is complex. Every issue, there's more to this situation. And that's what Nehemiah was, I think, as he examined. It's not just, hey, we need to build the east wall. We need to rebuild the dung gate. We need to go over here. He was realizing, guys, you haven't been here for 140 years just because we just need some hammers and nails. There's something bigger here. And I feel like that's what he was highlighting and what we can take home too. Is to realize that with every challenge, there are layers and issues. That's why it takes humility to examine the situation, to be honest with the things that are hindering my heart, that if I don't deal with that will add to the rubble. And then from there, how do I move forward? And being honest with not just the problems, but honest with the only way I can move forward, the only way that we can rebuild the wall is that if we do this together. It's the only way. Because Nehemiah knew if I just try to do this all by myself, we will never accomplish that. And once the objective is realized, it's time to move forward in unity. In verse 17 of Nehemiah chapter 2, then Nehemiah said to all the people, hey, you see the trouble we're in. He's acknowledged, you guys know this. You've been sitting here for 140 years. It's not news. You know that Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned with fire. But now, friends, come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be a disgrace. We will no longer have this issue. You see, it took honesty to not only admit, hey, Houston, we have a problem, but it took honesty to admit we can't do this individually or on our own or by our own scattered efforts. The only way we can achieve this and accomplish our goal to rebuild is when we move forward in unity. And then from there, the next characteristic is taking the initiative to take the first steps. It's, because here's the problem. We can sit here and identify and examine there's a problem. But sadly, too often we just stay in that. We just add to the rubble by saying, this is the problem, these are the problems, here's the problem, that person's the problem, whatever it may be. But the next characteristic is moving forward. It's saying, I need to take the first steps to moving forward, to rebuild, to reconcile, whatever that is in your life. And it only is going to happen when we work together in unity. The solution is in our ability to walk forward in unity. The scriptures teach us to be kingdom builders. Jesus said that our efforts in this world is to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. In other words, our efforts, friends, are to be kingdom builders. And when we do that, we experience the power of God. Nehemiah even wrote this in Nehemiah 2:18, when he said, I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. They replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began to do the good work. You see that? In that moment, when they were unified in what the objective is, what the goal was, and they knew it's not going to be easy, but we're going to do this together because our objective is something bigger than ourselves. And when they saw that, they realized God is with us. You see, my friends, when we seek first his kingdom, when we seek first his righteousness, when we walk in humility and honesty, when we seek to move forward in unity, seeking his kingdom, there we realize, there we experience the power of the gracious hand of God. That our rebuilding is not anything in this world. Our rebuilding is spiritual. It is an eternal focus that we are moving forward. And let me promise you something. When we unite together to move forward as kingdom builders, when our efforts are eternal, you better believe there is opposition. And here is the problem that Nehemiah and all the people of Jerusalem were facing that day. You see, if you remember a couple weeks ago when we were starting this series, we talked about why this was so crucial. Because back in that day, as they had all these powerful cities had walls. And if there was any city of significance, it had a wall. Otherwise, it became extremely vulnerable to the attacks of the enemy. And if the wall was torn down, they were weakened. And here was the people of Jerusalem without a wall for 140 years. They were vulnerable. 140 years, they sat in rubble and were just vulnerable to the enemies. And here's the hard thing. When we sit in the rubble of our own lives, of our own brokenness, sometimes we don't even realize, recognize, or acknowledge how vulnerable we are to the attacks of the enemy, whose number one mission is to destroy us. And this is what he's trying to do all the time. All the time. And when brokenness happens, when we sit in rubble, we are vulnerable to the attacks. And that's what Nehemiah was trying to help his people see, how vulnerable they were. And the only reason that they were still there and not completely destroyed was because the protection of King Artaxerxes. That was the only reason. And when Nehemiah came, he came, if you remember last week, he came under the protection and the authority of King Artaxerxes, who says, they can do this. I'm allowing them to do this. Go get supplies. You give them supplies. In other words, all these surrounding camps and enemies, you can't stop them. They're free to go. And here's the beautiful thing. As we move forward, we have a king that is on our side. And the enemy cannot stop us. But here's how the enemy works. What we see in Nehemiah is exactly how our enemy works all the time. They sit outside the camp with the effort of delivering fear, wearing us down, dividing. Fear, wearing down, dividing. Fear, wearing down, dividing. And that's what they did. And that's how our enemy attacks us. Which means we need endurance. In order for us to move forward as kingdom builders, and what Nehemiah saw there with the people is there need to be endurance to push through the opposition, because the opposition exists. You cannot deny it. You cannot look the other way. It is there, and it's trying to do everything it is to destroy you. For the people in Nehemiah, verse 19 of Nehemiah 2, but when Sanballat, here's the enemies, here's their opposition. When Sanballat, the Horonite, Tobiah, the Ammonite official, and Geshem, the Arab, heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. What is this they are doing, they asked. Are you rebelling against the king? What are you doing? You see what they're doing? They knew, okay, they're protected by King Artaxerxes. We can't attack them, but we're going to sit around here and we're just going to boom, 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 ridicule, beat them down, wear them down, make them afraid. Like we're going to come at some point. So they're going to live in fear. They're going to be worn down, and it's going to create division. And that's exactly what their opposition was trying to do. And that's exactly what our opposition tries to do all the time. The opposition is methodical and relentless. The enemy's efforts are all about fear, wearing down, and division. And through the opposition, the only way to have endurance is through the mighty and good God that exists. I'm protected by the King. I encourage you this week to read Psalm 65. What a powerful words from David in Psalm 65. Because there David was facing opposition and beaten down, and there in his little journal, he reminded us the powerful reminder that God is good. And God is like an Amazon river, and we are just a flower. He has more than enough power to wipe us out, to totally overwhelm us, but he uses his power to uphold us with his mighty right hand. He uses his strength to carry us and sustain us. And all we need to do is walk with him and trust him. Walk with him and trust him. And so, my friends, hear me clearly. In order to have endurance, we need to trust God to empower us for the task. It's the only way to fully trust that we are under the authority of a king who is protecting us, providing us the resource, and walking us forward. Nehemiah 2:20, verse 20, he told the people, listen, the God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, he told the enemies, will not share in Jerusalem or have any claim or historic right over this. You know what he's saying? Listen, I am under the authority of my king. So guess what? My king is going to give me success. And you, who stands on the outskirts, trying to destroy me, trying to create fear in my heart, trying to wear me down, trying to divide us, you can't win. Because my God says he is victorious. And I walk with him. You see, my friends, Nehemiah and the people knew the biggest issue to rebuilding the wall was the enemies were all around. They were all around, ridiculing them and trying to beat them down. And my friends, as we move forward for the sake of the gospel, As we move forward to be kingdom builders, we must recognize that we have a fierce enemy. We always need to remember that who the enemy is and how the enemy is out there to create fear, to overwhelm us and wear us down and to divide us. And that the only way that we will be able to move forward is in our trust and faith in God who will give us endurance. But it all starts by recognizing who the enemy is. Paul put it this way in Ephesians 6. He said, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, stand. Stand firm. You see, my friends, in this journey of rebuilding, in this journey of moving forward as we stand in the rubble of our lives in this world, it all has to come with the recognition that we have an enemy. And the problem is, the enemy is always trying to get us to make us believe that what the enemy is and what the enemy is not, try to turn our attention away from him. You see, the battle is not against flesh and blood. The battle is against the devil and his forces, which means the way we need to walk forward is to seek Jesus in all ways. To seek eternal victory, not personal victories. To seek his righteousness, not my righteousness. To seek his kingdom, not my kingdom. That's the rebuilding. And through him, we can have victory. I have two bits of homework for you. The first was to read Psalm 65 for strength and encouragement. The second is to go back, and maybe you've done this because we talked about this passage before, but to read through Ephesians 6. Because as we become kingdom builders, we need to prepare ourselves for the spiritual battle. Because the opposition is fierce and methodical and real. And he will attack every one of us in different ways. In order to do that, Paul writes that we need to put on the full armor of God. Just really quickly, the full armor of God that you can read through this week is to put on the belt of truth. The belt of truth. See, in the armor back then, the belt held everything together. And if you did not have the belt, all the armor would fall apart. In other words, what Paul is highlighting, in order for you to be strong against the attacks of the devil, you better have it all garnered together by truth. Because if it is not garnered together by the truth, that is the gospel, that is Jesus, you will lose your armor. It will all fall apart. And what happens is, because going all back, everything blends together in the scriptures, friends. When we go back to Hebrews 12, throw off everything that hinders us. And when we don't do that, when we don't walk that path, then like we walked through before, we allow the things that hinder our hearts become our little t truths. And then we try to put on our armor based upon our little t truths and not the truth. That's why all that journey is so critical and so important. But putting on the full armor of God with the belt of truth and then the breastplate of righteousness. You know, the breastplate protected the most important organ of the whole body, which is the heart. And with all the flaming arrows and everything else in that battle, if it took out the heart, everything else would die. And so, and it's the heart, it's the emotions that everything seeks out righteousness. You know, the problem is when you sit in rubble and all the emotions come in, we begin to seek ourselves rather than his righteousness, and that's where we need to focus on. And then the feet fitted with readiness that comes from the gospel of peace, that we seek him and his gospel and his truth. Paul writes about this in Romans 12, recognizing what the battle is and how we win in the battle, and that we win in the battle by not doing evil, but doing good, which comes right in here, fitting our feet for the gospel of peace. And then having the shield of faith to extinguish the flaming arrows. You know, in those days in battles, they would start the battle by shooting arrows of flames at the enemy. They were fierce. They were relentless. And they had to have the shield to protect them. Without the shield, you probably would be destroyed. And my friends, our shield comes through our faith and trust in the mighty right hand of God. That God is for us and with us. That he is the one who will protect us, that he is the victory. And then the helmet of salvation. The very thing that protects everything that I am is that my focus and my mindset is on the victory. And the victory is his salvation and eternity with him. and then the sword of the Spirit. Going back to Romans 12, I'm not trying to win my personal battles by getting back at people. I am trying to do good. Because when I seek Jesus and do good, there is victory. And the more I try to win battles on my own, I just add to the rubble. But the more I try to seek God and allow his Spirit to guide, I bring healing and restoration. And then lavish it with prayer. Did I tell you Nehemiah was a man of prayer? Over and over again throughout this book, we see how powerful prayer was for Nehemiah. My friends, if you haven't started yet, make this week your primary effort to be a person of prayer. That before you do anything, pray. Good or bad, pray. And as you seek him, as you put on the full armor of God, look at the promise that was given to us by the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah 41. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. The enemy wants to create fear, and God says, don't fear, because I am with you. The enemy wants to bring division and wear you down, and God says, don't be dismayed, because I am your God. I've got you. I've got you. So my friends, this week, whatever it is you're going through in your life, may you seek him. May you put on his full armor, and may you experience the power of his mighty right hand. Let's pray together. Father, thank you, because you are the source of life. You are the giver of hope. You are victory. And Lord, there are so many things in our life and in our world that just hurts and brings brokenness. And I'm sure every one of us has a story to tell. And Lord, in the brokenness of our lives and the brokenness of this world, may we seek you. And we put on your armor so that when the enemy attacks and tries to wear us down, we may be strong. That we may not walk in fear, but we may walk in victory because you are victory. And we may experience the power of your goodness. We love you and praise you in the name of Jesus. Amen.